Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 24 of the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a comedic spin on all the goings-on in the world. I come to you from the Great White North every Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download to listen to at work every Wednesday morning for everyone all around the world, because of course I record in Eastern Standard Time. My name is Jacob Paveo, and I'm recording a day late this week because I worked for 15 hours yesterday, so that wasn't fun. But yeah, a 15-hour shift, the longest that I've ever done. But I'm here today. Oh, it's not even going to be 24 hours later, so don't get your knickers in a twist. This week, of course, I'm late, but I keep asking myself, why? Why did you decide to work a 15-hour day? And I cannot, quite frankly, answer that question, but I planned on recording when I got home, even still as I was leaving work. But by the time I got home, that was just not gonna happen. But today, I'm wide awake, and I'm off work on a Wednesday, which kind of sucks, because I'd rather be off work on a Friday, but it's always fun to be off work. So we are going to have a great episode this week. If you haven't yet, check out last week's conversational podcast. I sat down with Mate Parissa to talk about politics and fighting and growing up, and it was a great time. You should definitely check it out if you haven't yet. And as always, share the podcast with your friends. Today's episode, we are going to talk about Iran, which is going to be fun, and waxing your genitals, because what better thing could I think of to discuss, I suppose. But first, I want to talk about one of my favorite things, and that is, of course, scientific discovery. So I forgot a comma there in my script. I will take you through one of my favorite stories of human ingenuity spanning over multiple decades, multiple research teams, several different Nobel Prizes, and ultimately one scientifically world-changing night in September of 2015. So stay tuned and check it out. A story which is rarely discussed, around an object of which little is known, is usually not the sort of thing that you want to mention on any form of public discussion. But this week, I rehashed the story out by watching an old PBS documentary, and I think it's super important to talk about scientific discovery and to keep people thinking about what this universe is that we inhabit. Albert Einstein's theory of relativity led the great mathematician to a series of equations he believed could not be solved. He published a paper, his most famous paper, his theory of relativity, and asked for anyone who could sort out a few different equations, which he could not solve, of course, to come up with a solution. He received an answer within a matter of weeks, as German mathematician Karl Schwarzschild had been working on these exact formulas, unknowingly but simultaneously. This was the exact solution to the extreme test of Einstein's theory of relativity surrounding the collapse of a star, a black hole, or a Schwarzschild singularity. The idea was that if something massive enough could rapidly collapse on itself, it would create a gravitational field both infinitely small and infinitely massive so that light itself could not escape its grasp, creating a singularity in both space and time where both time and energy are stuck in place due to gravitational force. However, Einstein himself believed that this extreme test of his formulas was resulting in some sort of a flaw, an error which he himself could not seem to overcome. And that's not to say that he believed his formulas were incorrect. He just believed that in reality, this could not happen. Even as late as 1993, Einstein released a paper stating that a collapsing star would just spin faster and faster up to the speed of light, but it would never form a singularity. Now, it's important to note that this paper was not once cited by any notable scientific paper. So at this point in time in 93, most people believed in black holes. Einstein still did not. To his deathbed, by what I can tell online, he never changed his opinion there. Now, the problem with black holes is that even though most people in math and science believed they existed, they are black. And in space, where everything else is also black, that means that they are physically impossible to see. Now, as well, because of how much gravity they have, not only does it trap all light inside, but there is nothing on the electromagnetic spectrum that we have found that they emit. So there is Hawking radiation, which is a hypothesis that has not been proven, that Stephen Hawking believes there is a form of radiation which can come out of a black hole, but we have no way of identifying it. We don't even know if it's real. Of course, listening to this in 2019, all of you have probably seen an image of a black hole, but that image, which came out earlier this year, is actually of the particles and dust around the black hole. The singularity itself is not visible in any light spectrum. So, taking you back to the 90s, it was actually still debated whether or not black holes were what they appeared to be. Several attempts were made to try and find a black hole, but the first success didn't come until 1998, when astronomers who had been tracking the motions of 90 different stars in the constellation Sagittarius to track their orbital patterns. One of these stars, S2 as it's been named, has been monitored or had been monitored since 1995, and its orbital data had been calculated and compiled all throughout. The fascinating thing about this star was that its orbit around a central point, which is now known as Sagittarius A, was at such an extremely high rate, almost that of how long it takes Jupiter to go around the sun. So that means there's a star, right, a sun essentially, out in space that's orbiting as fast as a planet orbits around our own star. That's extremely fast for such a large object. However, there was nothing there, at least apparently, for it to orbit around. So we searched the electromagnetic spectrum. We pointed every telescope we could at this section of the sky, and we saw nothing. However, this team knew that a massive amount of gravity had to exist there, and they were able to infer the existence of what's now known as Sagittarius A, with a mass of roughly 4.31 million times that of our sun, which is also referred to as 4.3 million solar masses. They had found the first supermassive black hole at the center of our very own galaxy. But we still had no evidence that could show up easily on the 6 o'clock news for soccer moms to understand. So in the scientific community, in the community of mathematics, everyone knew what this had to be. But, believe it or not, I'm actually just incredibly talented, and I can will knowledge into you. So it's super difficult for someone on the news to explain this in a quick 30-second segment what these guys had been working on for so many years. These concepts didn't make advertisers quiver because they make most people change the channel.
Please come back.
Right? It wouldn't be for another 18 years that finally there was something to show that could make anyone super excited about black holes. And quite frankly, super excited to be alive that very day. Since the 1960s, the Project LIGO, which is known as the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, don't worry, we can call it LIGO, had been the dream of physicist Kip Thorne and two others who at the time he was studying at Caltech and was convinced that he could find a way to record gravitational waves. Einstein had predicted that gravity must travel through space and time as a wave, which is something I want to sit on for a second, because this is an incredible insight. This means that just as sound travels through the air, which is something we can't see but we all know is there, right? We can breathe it in, air slows things down. When you go into space and throw something, it just keeps on going. Air is actually the friction that makes things stop. It makes things catch on fire when they hit our atmosphere, like an asteroid burns up above in the sky. This is telling us that space itself can be shifted by gravity. Space itself can be a conduit for gravity to pass through. Basically, Einstein predicted that space wasn't emptiness, but rather a fabric which the entire universe exists within. So now you can almost think of space like a fish tank, sort of, with very, very, very thin water. So thin that us as humans, we can't see it, we can't measure it yet. We don't know how. But we know there's something there. Or at least at this point in time, Einstein had inferred that there was something there. But no one had been able to prove it. This is how he believed gravity was moving through space. And, luckily for all of us, Kip Thorne agreed with that. Now, we have to fast forward 50 years, almost his entire career, after several launches, failures, and relaunches. At this point, Albert Einstein had been dead for a few years now, about a decade and a half, but the systems are in place at two different facilities, one in Hanford, Washington, and the other in Livingston, Louisiana, over 1,000 kilometers apart. Essentially, using a laser and 3 extremely technological mirrors, which could kind of move with different changes in the Earth. It's actually a fascinating thing to read about that is way too complicated for me to even try to explain. They placed these inside of a mile-long vacuum-sealed tube in 2 different parts of the U.S., more than 1,000 kilometers apart. Now, the system is designed so that if there is any motion that shifts the position of the mirrors, a detector will briefly light up and record the signal as a wave through space itself. And, of course, as you already know, on September 14th, 2015, that happened. And that wave sounded like this. That sound is from roughly 1.3 billion light years away of 2 30 solar mass black holes colliding in space. Okay? 2 black holes 30 times the mass of the sun running into each other 1.3 billion light years away. As unintimidating as it sounds from here, that is that amount of energy was produced from an event that was the second most powerful explosion ever recorded by humans, second only to the Big Bang. And at this point, I am more than willing to point out how absolutely funny it sounds, because it sounds like a little drop of water. But what you're hearing is space and time for a fraction of 1 second. It's like a tiny, tiny fraction of a second. A wave moved through all of us that at the atomic level, it would have actually meant that the nucleus of an atom within you was actually separated for such a fraction of a second that you would have had no idea. It doesn't have any impact on our lives because of how small it is, but we're all impacted by it. Time splits from one side to the other because it bends. It's absolutely fascinating, and all that we as humans can record from it is this little whoop. But I mean, the result has changed science forever. We now know that space itself can for sure be a conduit for energy. And we learned for certain that black holes are physical objects in our universe. It's not just some strange thing that appears to have a physical pull on it. Now we know for sure black holes have a physical impact, and they do exist within our universe. Something that's infinitely massive, doesn't allow light or radiation to escape, and yet is so common that nowadays we are finding them everywhere. LIGO has measured 10 colliding black hole events, some significantly stronger than this first one. So this one is no longer the second strongest explosion, which is really what it is, in space that we have recorded. But the coolest one is that there were two binary neutron stars that were swirling around each other that collided. And when we heard it over LIGO, it was so different, and they could tell where in the sky it was coming from, so we pointed telescopes in that direction. And we could actually see the light from these two stars colliding. So the gravity waves hit us first because the stars were spinning so rapidly. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, you're talking about stars rotating around each other multiple times a minute, right? Think of what that has to do to the gravity field around them. It's just incredible, the impact. And then when they collide, they explode in this bright flash of light, and we read the as I said, the gravitational waves coming through LIGO. Then we pointed all of our telescopes, and for several weeks afterwards, we could see the light from the explosion, which has now gone dark, and we don't yet know if it is a black hole. We have to wait for some objects to start interacting with it, which probably won't happen in our lifetimes, but we may have actually witnessed the birth of a black hole. We just don't know yet. But, I mean, this is real. Like, you know what I mean? We were able to hear this, a sound similar to what you just heard, notice where it came from in the sky, and say, yo, if you point a telescope at that, you're going to see some shit. And they did within a few hours, and they saw some shit. We watched these two stars spinning and then colliding and just lighting up the sky, which is, I mean, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But we didn't know for certain that these objects existed until only 4 years ago. That is awesome. Earlier this year, the first black hole was actually photographed, which I touched on a little bit earlier, which was so incredibly difficult to do that honestly, I still can't believe it happened. I had discussions with people who are just as into this world as I am, that they had put out a thing saying, we've photographed a black hole, and we're going to be releasing it in a few weeks. And they were showing it to different people in the scientific community to get consensus that what they were doing was correct and whatnot. And we didn't believe it. Like, everyone I talked to was like, I don't know. I don't think so. It's going to be weird. Maybe it's going to be just the center of a galaxy. We don't really know what it's going to be. And what it ended up being, of course, I mean, Google it if you haven't seen it. You absolutely should have seen it. I actually plan on getting a big print of it in the near future. But basically what they were able to photograph, because the black hole itself is a black hole, you can't take a picture of it, was, as I mentioned, all of the dust particles that are swirling around this black hole so fast that they're burning because they're all running into each other and everything, that it creates a circle of light around the black hole, right? And then within it, it's called the event horizon, which is the point where nothing returns. Once you reach the event horizon, you're in the dark. And that's it. You're never coming back. So we can't see within the event horizon, but we can see everything around it, and it creates this cool-ass circle. Definitely look it up if you've never seen that photo. I'm sure I've talked about it on this show before. And I mean, like I said, I still can't believe that it happened. These two events are so scientifically important that you absolutely need to know about it. You need to tell your kids about this. Say, I was there. I remember that day. Because positive news is so often forgotten. So let's not let this story get lost to time. When the news came out that they had detected gravitational waves, I remember because I woke up. There had been oops, I dropped my sunglasses. There had been a rumor about it for quite some time. And much like the photo of the black hole, except the rumor of gravitational waves was like they detected it, but no one knows. Like, did they actually detect it? Maybe they detected an earthquake. Maybe they detected a truck driving, blah, blah, blah. Of course they had thought about all of these things and checked for all of these things, and now we know for certain none of those things occurred. They had all the protocols in place, and honestly, it was a day for me that changed my entire perspective on the world, because all of a sudden something was discovered that was so incredible. I mean, it told us for certain that space itself is malleable, that space itself is something. We don't know what that something is. We don't understand it. I mean, you're talking about something so big. You're basically asking an ant to describe the Earth, the planet that it's walking on, right? We are on this tiny little, actually, it's more like asking a dust mite to explain the Earth. Because what a dust mite is to the Earth, like the size of a dust mite compared to the size of the Earth, isn't even close to the scale of what the Earth is to our known universe, right? There is no scale for that. Like, these are numbers that we don't even have words for. That's how small we are. So we can't wrap our heads around what we are inside or what we are a part of. We don't even know the right words to use for the universe. But we learned that space itself can bend. It can have energy moving through it. And this opens up the door to so many things. What else travels through space? Is there bigger forms of energy that move in such big waves, bigger than gravity, that we haven't even realized? Can this explain all of the dark energy and dark matter in the universe? It might. It really might. But we don't know yet. And this opened the door to so much. It basically told us, especially, this happened in 2015. So I was 21 when this happened. And at 21 years old, I found out that for the rest of my life, I am going to be fed a constant stream of incredible deep space scientific discoveries because it opened a door to a whole field that lots of people had been laughing at. That a number of people just thought, there's no way we can ever know about it. Not even that they were laughing about it because they didn't believe it, but the idea of LIGO, that you could measure something so small. This is how accurate the measurement has to be. It's as if you had a telescope from the Golden Gate Bridge pointed exactly at the head of the Empire State Building in New York. Okay? That is how, actually, I think it's a penny on the head of the Empire State Building. That's how accurate you're talking about this laser measurement to be. That's why it took them so many years. LIGO first started in 2002. It launched, it closed, it launched, it closed. Its third launch was the time they first detected one. And as I said, we have detected 10 black hole collisions and 1 collision between 2 neutron stars. This is world-changing. It is so exciting. It is so important that, as I said at the top, this is something I've known about since the day that it was released. I've been talking about, but I'd never brought it up on the podcast until I watched a documentary which reminded me about it earlier this week that was just put up on Netflix. And I think this needs to be talked about. You need to tell people about this because it's such a cool story. Kip Thorne is a man who's still alive today, who put his entire career into this because he believed he could do it. He could prove it. And everyone told him, I don't think so. There's no way it's going to happen, until the day he did it. And now he got himself $1 million prize and a big old gold-looking metal thing to wear around his neck when he goes to fancy dinner parties. And he will forever be the physicist who really pushed the idea over 50 years on how we can discover gravitational waves. So, this week in What the Fuck, a woman is suing multiple salons across Western Canada for choosing to deny her service for waxing, Brazilian service, because they didn't want to wax her fucking balls. Yeah. LGBTQ activist Jessica Yaniv is a trans woman who apparently found the only way to get paid that she knows. As a self-described professional activist and digital marketing expert, I'm sure she needed to pay her rent, so she went to multiple salons trying to get a Brazilian. Then whipped out her dick and said, wax away. What the fuck is this world coming to? Because this is being taken very seriously in the courts for whatever fucking reason. With more than a dozen legal complaints, some have settled out of court, which means she's already been paid by a few different companies. But this is fucked. Can we not just say that out loud? There are places that advertise male Brazilians. They do them because you need to use a different wax and a different technique. Why is that? Well, if you put hot wax on your balls, what do you think's going to happen? Probably not going to be too good for you. So she chose to go to female-only salons, essentially to make a scene. And she is getting lots of praise from her community, and the courts are seriously working out exactly how to sort this case out, because they are saying, or at least her complaint is, that she's being discriminated against based on her gender, that she's being turned down based on their gender, which, from my perspective, is absolutely mind-blowing, because no, she's being turned down simply based on the fact that she has a penis and she's trying to get a Brazilian wax, which is specifically meant for vaginas. It's like if I got pissed off that I can't go to an OBGYN, Or if I started suing hospitals because they wouldn't put fucking embryos in my ovaries, which I don't fucking have. It's fucking ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. She can go get herself a Brazilian at so many places, but she wanted to make a scene. I think someone like Jessica needs to be talked to. I do. Just sat down and talked to. Because you can put it really, really simply. There is literally no 19-year-old girl making a living waxing people at a salon who wants to wax your sweaty balls, lady. I'm sorry that you don't feel like a man and that you got yourself a big old dick and you're stuck in this situation. But until the day that the dick is gone, you need to get yourself a manzillion like the rest of us. Don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and family. Tell them all about the mighty power that be. Mention it at work, of course, and make sure they know all about the incredible content available ad-free every single Tuesday, except this week on Wednesday. As always, thank you all so much for the support, and feel free to reach out to me anytime using the contact page over at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com or on social media, which can, of course, be found in the description for this episode on your podcast platform of choice. If you have a platform of choice where I don't show up, make sure you let me know. To finish up this episode, because at the beginning I said I was awake after, my long shift yesterday, but now I'm tired. I've been talking for over half an hour, and I was tired. But I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Iran, because I just want to do a little bit of an intro to it, a little bit of my feelings on where we're at right now. But I think in the next few weeks, this might end up being a very big topic that we need to talk about. So I wanted to introduce it a little bit right now. So, of course, when Donald Trump first became president, the United States pulled out of the Iran deal. Essentially, the deal was that a whole bunch of allied nations would be able to monitor and limit their usage of uranium, and basically it had to stay below a level where it could become a weapon. That's a simple way to explain it. And I mean, we could talk about the Iran deal, but we're not going to right now. So the rest of the world, however, is still in the deal. So the U.S. pulled out and no one else did. But now Iran is well, fuck, the U.S. is the only scary country that was involved. So as of July 10th, they publicly stated that they now are enriching uranium beyond the point they were allowed. And when you enrich it, that's how it becomes more and more capable of going boom. So since then, the U.S. and Iran have both talked about making a deal, but have really made little effort on either side. Both parties could be equally to blame. Then we had two different situations where 4 and then 2 oil tankers were physically attacked. So 6 in total were attacked with mines under the water. Now, the Iran says they weren't involved, but these are placed in the Hormuz Strait, the Strait of Hormuz, which is international waters that cuts right near Iran, and they say that they control the waters off their shores, which no one else gets to, so no, you don't. But it's essentially like if Panama stopped boats suddenly from sailing through the Panama Canal. They, international waters like this, outside of war times, are allowed to be traveled. That's how we allow for free trade throughout the world. And now Iran is saying no. On top of that, as recently as yesterday, several boats have been captured by Iran, and they are keeping them at sea. That way, it's because it's in international waters, so it doesn't become illegal until you bring them onto your shores, which is fucked up. But that's what they're doing. The UK has asked for a united European alliance because it was a Swedish-owned ship just late last night that was captured, but it was flying an English flag. They're working for an English company, so they're flying the flag of the United Kingdom, and now the UK is saying we need a united European alliance to defend the Strait of Hormuz and allow ships to pass through, which a few different countries, France and Belgium, I believe it was, have kind of supported it, but haven't come out and said we're willing to send troops there. And Germany has stated that they are looking into it, but they are not ready to make an announcement whether or not they agree with the UK, so they're holding meetings and whatnot. Now, the US is organizing a meeting with world military leaders in Florida for later this week. Actually, I think it might even be today, to plan for future use of the strait and how the U.S. plans to defend boats going through. The UK has said that they support the U.S. fully, and they just kind of want to come at it from a few different approaches. So they'll work with the U.S., they're going to the U.S. meeting, and they're going to support the U.S. strategy, and then they also want a European strategy. Because, of course, this complicates things because all of these European companies are actively involved in the Iran nuclear deal still, as I mentioned before. So the U.S. is the only country that left. So for all of these nations to now side with the U.S., they might as well pull out of the deal. And that's kind of what we're stuck with. It's very political and very messy, but the very first thing I typed out when I typed in the title, rant, space, Iran, enter, very first line was, this isn't the time for war. Because I am well aware of how politics works and that the incumbent during a war typically wins the election, even if it's not a full-blown war, but some sort of escalation of conflict. And guess who's up for election next fall? Mr. Donald Juan Trump. Donald J. Trump is up for election next fall. Doofus Donald, I think he doesn't like Iran. There's no question, and for good reason. I actually quite agree with him there. But I don't think the solution is this escalation of conflict. He has stated, actually, I'm going to try to pull up his tweet right now, but he has been tweeting back and forth with Iran, threatening them, full-on threatening them. So if my computer will ever load, basically Trump is, he was called Genghis Khan by Iran's foreign minister on Twitter, which I think is absolutely hilarious. But it's also like, fuck, why the hell would you have said that, right? And then he said that Iran will be a country no more if they threaten the United States. His exact tweet was, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again. So that was on May 19th. And since then, he said that he's not hoping for regime change, and he kind of walked it back. And then they called him Genghis Khan. He was like, motherfuckers, let's go. Like, he's crazy, man. He's a little crazy. I actually kicked my table when I did that. Motherfuckers, let's go. I got all into my my presidential role there. That was very presidential of me for a moment. Modern presidential, at least. But here's the problem. I've said before that for that part of the world, there is one democracy, and we have to support it, and that democracy is Israel. and there are no personal reasons for me to side with Israel other than they let people vote. So, sorry. No, I'm not. I'm not sorry. In that area as well, we are allied with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has put together a coalition of Muslim-led countries that don't even necessarily get along with all of us against Iran, because Iran is starting to like attack them in small ways. They're financing terror groups that are going into all these countries. Saudi Arabia had an attack happen in a more remote section of their country. There was like a rocket fired. I mean, it is becoming it reminds me of Vietnam, and I'm looking at that part of the world, and if not Syria, I don't know where these guys are going to fight, but it's going to be another fucking Vietnam where we're going to send a whole bunch of troops. Well, we probably won't, but they will, to a random country that has nothing to do with the problem, and they're going to fight it out over there. And I mean, that might be a best case scenario, because this is the problem with, I've never talked about religious extremism on my podcast, but this is the problem with a religion that did not go through a proper modernization, right? A renaissance. Islam never had its renaissance period where all of a sudden its followers were like, holy fuck, we're cutting people's heads off, we probably shouldn't do that. And the reason that never happened is there's no central power in Islam. So if you talk to Muslims here in the West, they are, for the most part, fantastic people. I worked for a Muslim woman for 2 years who was a fantastic boss. Her family was extremely kind to me always. I mean, several of my friends are born and raised Muslims still to this day, and they're fantastic, but they're not the ones any of us should ever talk about. You should never say, well, there's 1 billion Muslims and like 800,000 of them are really nice. Or 800 million, I should say. Because that's still fucking like 200 million people that want to cut your head off, still a fucking problem, okay? And the number is very high, right? Pew polls in the United Kingdom from 2010, I think it is, but if you do a little bit of research, you can find it. I'm not bullshitting this. Show that 100% of Muslims in London that were polled, and I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 individual Muslims polled, said that homosexuality is a problem and that it shouldn't be allowed. And they also said that homosexuality, 40% of them believe it should be illegal. And I think it was still around 20% of them thought that the punishment for homosexuality should be death. Okay? 100% of London, England-based, English-speaking Muslims believed that homosexuality is offensive and shouldn't be allowed. That's fucked, guys. It's fucked up. And if you're in this part of the world, you absolutely believe that. And if you don't actually believe it, you have to pretend to believe it, which can be just as bad, right? Because you don't want your head cut off. And if you know someone's gay, what are you going to do? You're going to fucking cut their head off because you don't want yours cut off. That's how fucked it is. This whole part of the world is fucked. And when it comes to conflict like this, you're dealing with a supreme leader. That's what they call him. Al-Shabib, Habib, Hamim, Habib, whatever the fuck his name is, who runs Iran. Who the fuck cares? He is put in a position where he needs to represent pure strength. Because, as I said, there's no central leadership. So if you go to an imam here, they are born and raised here with Western values. If you go to an imam over there, which he is widely regarded as the most powerful, at least in the country, because he is not only a political leader, he is a religious leader. It's a religious dictatorship, a religious monarchy of sorts. He has so much power over everything that he has to come across as the strongest man around. And if Donald Trump, like with Kim Jong-un, Trump can fucking pull out his little dick and wave it around, and Kim Jong-un will still be like, wow, I have a smaller dick and yours is actually bigger than mine. Cool. Because it's this fat little Asian man, okay? When you're dealing with this big ol' Iranian dude, he's going to whip out this big long fucking thing and slap Trump in the face with it. Because he can't hide it from his people, right? North Korea, that tactic worked because none of the North Koreans know that he looks like a bitch. That Kim Jong-un looks like a bitch in some of this internationally. They just hide it from their people. They're like, fuck, they don't need to see that, right? They don't need to know that Trump was talking shit. They just see me talking shit. Whatever, who cares? Whereas people from Iran, Iranians, Persians, I don't know what the fuck we call them, they are public. They have access to the public. They can see what is happening, and he needs to wave around his dick and make it look bigger than Donald Trump. That is the problem that we are faced with. So as of right now, both countries have shot down each other's drones, which is fucking a very juvenile of everyone, right? It's like when you're like in class and you like throw spitballs at like someone you don't like ow, you know? That's basically what they're doing. Like, you swatted my fly out of the air. I'm going to swat your fly out of the air. I think the U.S. has taken down 2 Iranian drones, and Iran's taken down 1 American drone. Whatever. Like, okay, you dropped $300 million into the ocean. You got there first, and you're going to steal our technology. No, everyone knows what the fuck's going on with these drones, okay? So it hasn't been anything super big yet, and hopefully it doesn't stay that way. Hopefully I don't really have to talk about it again, but I just want to reiterate that this isn't the time for war. The captured sailors need to be freed. All of the ships attacked actually were reached by American or English or Japanese military vessels, and they were able to, like, the ships are fucking burning now and floating away at sea. So all you environmentalists should be like, fuck Iran, because they're literally like oil ships on fire that would have not been otherwise, because they fucking mined them. Like, not mined with a pickaxe, put a fucking mine underwater and tried to blow them the fuck up, full of oil from Qatar. All of them, okay? So because people didn't want to play tag with them, now they're fucking throwing stones and telling the teacher that, I don't know, the fucking bird must have dropped the stone on little Tommy's head. But little Tommy's going to swing soon, and unfortunately, that's just the reality. So hopefully we don't have to talk about it again. I'm just going to reiterate one more time, this isn't the time for war. It's never the time for war. That's probably what I should have said. Yeah, I guess I fucked that up. Thank you all for listening. I really encourage you, as always, to take these discussions outside into the real world. I hope you really enjoyed them, especially the part on the black holes. I hope I came across as you could understand what I'm trying to say. I don't even know what I'm trying to say right now. I hope you were able to understand as I went through it, and that you can share it with all of your friends and talk to them about it, because it really is such a cool thing. And if you can't explain it, maybe you can send them here, because I would love to explain it on your behalf. And of course, this podcast is always ad-free, and all that I ask is for you to share it with your friends and family. Subscribe on any podcast app or over on YouTube, and tell your friends about me each and every week. There was a joke made last week about me getting not a subscription, but an advertisement from Mate. That is not happening. No one wants to pay me right now. But don't worry, because I had someone reach out and ask me what I'm going to say, since I always say this podcast is always ad-free, and I'll ask you to share it with your friends and family. They're like, what are you going to say instead? I'm like, well, when I'm getting paid, instead I will say, this podcast has ads, motherfucker, I'm getting paid. But until that day, I just want to thank you all, and I want to remind you to come back next week and enjoy the podcast with all of us. Thank you very much, and I will see you next Tuesday.